Week 7 is in the books, and we've got some risers and fallers coming out of a crazy week of NFL action. And Jeff, the first guy I want to talk about, Travis Hunter, a huge riser coming out of week 7. We had seen almost nothing through the first handful of weeks as they were kind of slow rolling his development, getting him involved on defense. And now we see him in a full-time offensive role, leading the team with 14 targets, catching 10 of those, scoring his first touchdown, having over 100 yards. He has more routes run over the last 2 weeks than any other wide receiver in the NFL. How much excitement do we have right
I
now
mean,
regarding
you
Travis
have to have a
Hunter?
lot of excitement. And I think you look holistically, looking at these two Jacksonville wide receivers, and we have a private chat that we talk through some things with, some of our friends. And we were talking through Brian Thomas Jr. And basically the way that I view Brian Thomas Jr. is that he's a wide receiver 2 that can produce as a wide receiver 1 as long as he doesn't know he's the wide receiver 1. It's and the analogy that I gave was Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. And like Tatum is
Mhm.
overall a better basketball player, but like Tatum is obsessed with the history of the NBA and about where he's viewed in the NBA and all these different things. And Brown's just a little bit of a different personality. And he's probably not built to be the number 1 of the two of them, but there are periods of time where Brown is better than Tatum, and he's when they won the title, Brown was better than Tatum in some of those series. And so I think when you look at it, I do think that Travis Hunter is wired that way to be the number 1 wide receiver, to take on that role, to be the quote unquote,
Mhm.
I hate using alpha because that means like I really hate calling somebody a beta that can do some bad things to me in an alley. I'll just say that. So, but at the same time, you look at it as a true number 1 receiver, that type of attitude, I think Hunter brings that. And because of that, I think they should embrace that. They should put him into that role. And I think that would take a tremendous amount of pressure off Brian Thomas Jr. and allow Brian Thomas Jr. to flourish and to be able to put up, because we know the numbers that Brian Thomas Jr. can put up. And so hopefully coming out of this, they've got a bye now. Hopefully they take a breath, they are able to reset, and whatever injuries things that Brian Thomas Jr. is working through, those can get by, but they can treat Travis Hunter as the number 1 receiver, allow him to have that attitude, carry that attitude into the locker room as I'm the guy, everybody look at me. And then that will allow, we saw Brian Thomas Jr. in college, he's playing with Malik Neighbors. And I think Malik Neighbors is very much that type of player that is able to be wired that way. And you just, in life, you just have people like that are wired to be able to be the number 1 and wired to be able to be the number 2.
And I just can't help but keep going back to like how I talked about what I thought this offense would look like in April. Like as soon as they drafted Travis Hunter, to me, it just seems so obvious with like Liam Cohen coming from Tampa Bay. Ryan Thomas Jr., very much so a Mike Evans type of player, a guy who has great straight line speed, has size, can get behind defenses, is best outside the numbers, can occasionally run that deep post and do that. But like Mike Evans is best at playing on the boundary and doing things deep downfield. And then you've got Travis Hunter, who is very similar to Chris Godwin, this like super twitched up athlete that can play out of the slot and can make plays after the catch. And I don't have a better term to use. I've said square peg in a round hole so many times when talking about the wide receivers in Jacksonville, but we're seeing Liam Cohen asking Brian Thomas Jr. to do things that he has never done before, like catching these traffic heavy routes across the middle of the field. That is not what he does. And similarly, we're seeing Travis Hunter, running, and it worked. Like he got a deep touchdown, deep downfield that he was able to score on, but I want to see a high-low offense where Brian Thomas Jr. is getting deep downfield, Travis Hunter is working underneath, and I hope that Liam Cohen is able to do some self-scouting during the bye week and put those guys in the right roles. But I also want to go back to Brian Thomas Jr. We're talking about Travis Hunter as a riser, obviously. Along with that, Brian Thomas Jr. is a bit of a faller. Do we even know what happened with that injury? Have we gotten like any word on that? Because I didn't see anything that happened to me. That was just like I'm kind of done with this game. I just want to sit on the sidelines. Like that was very much so. And even the commentators, they were like, we don't know what happened there. Like it was just a very routine, like, he and the defender engaged and then like he just kind of trotted off to the sideline. To me, that was just like, I'm ready for the
Yeah,
bye
I mean,
week.
that was kind of my takeaway. I mean, you're a little bit more plugged into the injury stuff than I am, but it seems to me that when teams are going on to the bye, we don't get the same level of injury reporting as we do in a normal week. And
Right.
so there's
We
kind
do
of
not. we won't get any information on Brian Thomas's injury until next Wednesday, like,
Yeah.
going into week 9 when they have that first practice.
Yeah, so I
That's when
mean
we'll find
that
out.
that element is at play. Not really knowing, but he had a couple. There were a couple hard falls that he took, or where he tried to go up and just came down pretty hard. And I think it just reached a point where, like, no Moss, like we're losing by 4 touchdowns. Like I'm done here.
Been there, man. I totally get it. Let's talk about Chris Olave, second in the league in targets right now. Another big riser, obviously, coming off of his 2 touchdown performance. Second in the league in targets behind only Jamar Chase. And Jeff, this is so funny. Like I wrote about this in my article. We talked about this 2 weeks ago with Tedero McMillan too. That like if you look at the targets, the receptions, the yardage, he had his worst game of the year in week 6, but he bailed out with 2 touchdowns because that positive regression hit. Chris Olave didn't do anything spectacular in this game, had the fewest targets that he's had in a single game this season, but he scored 2 touchdowns. So I think the main reason I want to talk about this, it's the same thing we talked about with Tedero McMillan 2 weeks ago, is just like chase the volume, trust that the variance is going to balance itself out. Like if you're getting players who are getting lots of opportunities, especially talented players, even if they aren't in a great situation, it's only a matter of time before that variance hits in the right direction. We know that this isn't like a Jackson Smith-Njigba type of situation where the offense is firing on all cylinders and he's going to score a touchdown every single week. He's not an Amon St. Brown in a Detroit Lions offense. He's not a Rashi Rice in a Chiefs offense, but still, like, these crazy situations we have where Deontay Johnson sees nearly 100 targets and doesn't score a touchdown. That is the outlier. More often than not, if you're chasing after a guy who is number 2 in the league in targets, he's going to score touchdowns. And
Yeah, I
that's what
mean
we saw
that's
this
what
week
I
with
said
Olave.
on Friday's preview show. We were talking about looking at Olave and saying, he's second in the league in targets. He'll be number 1 in the league in targets after this week because Puka Nacua was number 1 and was wide receiver 26 at the time. So one thing is going to give one way or the other. Either the targets are going to let up because the production's not there, or the production will arrive. There's starting to be some talk about the Saints going with Tyler Shuck, and for the love of God, please don't, because they are there. We have so many horrible offensive teams that the Saints are the right kind of bad, where they're fun and yeah, they're fun bad, and
They're fun
Spencer
bad.
Rattler's able
Yeah.
to do some things, and because Spencer Rattler is able to do some things, the other team doesn't have to not do things, and so hopefully they don't make that decision. But at the same time, when you're one, I think they're 1-6 now, and you're headed in one direction for sure. You spent a second round pick on a quarterback, and you're probably going to want to figure out at some level, is there anything there at all? That's probably my biggest concern about Olave, is that they go away from Rattler, because I think if you were to guarantee that Rattler is going to be the quarterback over the course of the season, this volume continues, you're going to have some boom bust, but you're going to have some boom. And I don't know if with Tyler Shuck, we can definitely guarantee some boom.
And of course, from like a fantasy perspective, we want Spencer Rattler out there because he's a gunslinger and he's going to force the ball to Chris Olave in double coverage and that sort of fun stuff. But I think the other big takeaway from this game against Chicago, and I really don't want to sound like a homer here, but there's been so much talk about Caleb Williams' development and like the promise that the Bears are showing. But this defense is really starting to come together as well. And Dennis Allen, he got the game ball after this game, playing against his former team, but man, like this was by far the worst game of the year for Spencer Rattler. 3 interceptions, he had a fumble, he took 4 sacks. I mean, this defense is really starting to come on strong, and they aren't that kind of like, hey, they're not doing what the rest of the NFL is doing, where so much of the NFL is like, we'll give you those underneath shots. They are saying, like, we are going to attack you aggressively and we'll give up those big plays every once in a while, but they are going to make it hell for the quarterback out there. It kind of reminds me of like a diet Brian Flores type of
And to
defense.
be fair to the Saints, they went up against Dennis Allen, who knows more about them than literally anybody in the
He
league,
knows.
basically,
Yeah,
probably like any other coach. So I mean, it was a
right.
brutal matchup there for the Saints, and it's really unfortunate. I believe it was a torn ACL for Kendry Miller, but like it's
Yeah,
and
he's
you,
out for
you
the
just
year.
gotta
Yep.
feel horrible for Kendry Miller, where like things are starting to come together. He's looking pretty good, and then they go up against Dennis Allen's defense, and he tears his
Dennis
dang
Allen.
ACL like the first time he touches the ball. And it's like, come on, like what does the world have with this relationship? Like what has Kendry Miller ever done? like it's just wild of like the way that the universe works, apparently. But yeah, it's if you were to look for any coach that would be able to unravel and do attack Spencer Rattler, I mean, it would be Dennis Allen, I think, in that matchup. One thing I want to, this is, if you have any more Bears Saints points, we can go with them. But I want to say something random, but
No, no.
I think it's
Let's
interesting
hear it.
on. I feel like I'm not seeing much talk about Trey McBride, and it's curious to me because I don't know if it's not the breakout year anymore, or if it's just he doesn't have the weird touchdown thing anymore. But he's like trending towards even better numbers than what he had last year. And it's like
Oh, yeah.
nobody really, it's just kind of ignored. It's like one of those things where like nobody really is watching the Cardinals games, and it's just good now, and it's just like ignored good. I think that those are some of the most interesting players in the league sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, Trey McBride, he was ranked. I mean, I had him as the tight end one ahead of Brock Bowers, and I know that was crazy to a lot of people at the time. But I mean, you look at it last year, he was sixth in the league in target share. Like he was pulling as many targets as the best wide receivers in the NFL were. And yeah, there was that weird touchdown variance, and that's starting to hit this year. But yeah, I think there hasn't been a lot of buzz about Trey McBride because you just know exactly who he is. Like he's tiers ahead of every single tight end out there. Um, I actually just remembered I actually had George Kittle as my tight end one in draft rankings. I had Trey McBride ahead of Brock Bowers, but at tight end two, George
Well,
Kittle. Hope you
your
can
score is going to be pretty
get
bad,
healthy
Dave.
and get back
So
out there.
just get ready for that. But I
It
would,
will be,
I was,
but higher than anyone else on Jackson Smith and the Jigma.
well,
That'll help balance it out a
but
little
I
bit,
think that the reason why I talk about Trey McBride though is because through the first,
dude. I'm sorry. I just pulled up Trey McBride, his player profiler, which we love for player profiler. You know, they do great work. You know, that top line
yeah,
is opportunity. Targets, target share, target rate, snap share, slot snaps, routes run, and route participation. Trey
yeah,
McBride is number one across the board. I have never once seen any player that is just number one across the board in
yeah,
every
and
single stat.
I want these. This thing's not working for me because it would do the things that I want to do quickly, but the reason why I bring up Trey McBride is partially like sometimes just greatness, like out of sight, out of mind type situation. But the other part of it is I wanted to quickly run the numbers because if I remembered correctly, and I did remember correctly, through week 7 last year, he wasn't exactly setting the world on fire. And through week 7 last year, he was averaging. Let's see, I'll get there. Okay, it's here. It's so he was averaging maybe a little bit better than what I realized, but 93 receptions, 912 yards. Like he ended up like better than that on the reception terms. The volume, the efficiency fell out a little bit, but it's kind of just some of these situations that we're at the halfway point of the season, and sometimes looking and seeing where players are trending, looking for undervalued players, looking for players that will end up in just different standing than the end of the year. And sometimes those first, especially like those first 4 games, I think that window can really lock into people. And we're coming out of like the next 4 game window. Look for some of those situations. Look for where there has been opinion has been formed very, very staunchly that might not necessarily be correct. I think is just kind of where my whole thought is.
That is such a good segue into the next player that I'd like to talk about, Jeff. Romeo Doubs, who has very quietly just entrenched himself as the wide receiver one for the Packers. And I've got him as a riser this week. He has steadily been climbing the ranks every single week when I do these rest of season rankings. And I should have started off the show. These aren't pure dynasty rankings. These are my rest of season rankings that we pull these risers and fallers from. But it's a good jumping off point for some dynasty and redraft discussion. But right now, he's pulling a 22% target share that is 28th best among all wide receivers in the league. And I think this is just like a good story of NFL development. You know, I really dug into it deep over the weekend. And this is a guy who, when he came into the league, like had almost no expectations at all. He was out there as kind of their new Alan Lazard, just blocking. And that was pretty much it. And then those blocks turned into routes and those routes turned into targets. And now he is just like very quietly emerging as the wide receiver one here in Green Bay. And this is one of those where I think people are very entrenched in their opinions on Romeo Doubs, that he's just a bad player, that he's not efficient, that, you know, he's just out there to block and run wind sprints. But that is not the case this year. We're seeing this guy steadily involved near the red zone. We're seeing him pull the deepest ADOT of his career. So all these preconceived notions we had about Romeo Doubs that he can't draw targets deep downfield. He's debunked that. We're saying that he's not somebody who can be relied on in the red zone. He's averaging one red zone target per game. And Romeo Doubs quietly emerging as a wide receiver one, not in fantasy, but a wide receiver one on his team and making for a steady wide receiver three in fantasy that you can
Yeah,
rely on a
absolutely
weekly
he is,
basis.
and keep an eye on that Packers receiver depth chart because Christian Watson has been back at practice, and I think there's some optimism that he'll be back this week. They've been playing Malik Heath and Dontavian Wicks on the outside receiver opposite Romeo Doubs, and neither have done much of anything. You might have just learned that they've been playing Malik Heath and Dontavian Wicks on the outside receiver for Romeo Doubs. They've got Matthew Golden working kind of in the old Jayden Reed role, and Watson should plug right back in, probably bring some verticality, allow maybe Matthew Golden to do a little bit more of the closer to the line of scrimmage Jayden Reed type things. But the only
Yeah.
the goal line slant doesn't work in the NFL except Romeo Doubs, and it works every single time to Romeo Doubs.
And funny enough, it worked for Devontae Adams for a long, long time as well. Something about that wide receiver one in Lambeau on the goal line slant. It's just automatic, and it's been working for him this year. So, Jeff, let's like peel back the layers a little bit and talk about Romeo Doubs. I mean, this is a guy who I think a lot of people have just kind of written off for dead, especially in Dynasty. Still just 25 years old. I mean, this is like a young player on an ascending offense, and I think there's just so much hope in the dynasty community that Matthew Golden and Christian Watson are going to push this guy out of a job. But I'm just going to ask the question that I do so often, like, what if he doesn't? We talk about that all the time. Like, everybody expects one thing to happen, but if it doesn't, like, you want to be that guy that, as Adam Hart said, likes to say, like, be wrong in the right direction. And I think so many people expect these like young, talented first, second round picks to step up. But what if Romeo Dubs just maintains his job as the wide receiver one here? Like, what would you give up for him in
Um,
Dynasty right now?
I mean, I think he's probably like a contender second is probably where I
Third.
think that you probably land.
Yeah.
It's so Jacob Sanderson is our good friend, and he's so smart, and Jacob is fantastic, and we've known him for a long, long time. And I think one of the interesting things that Jacob talks about is the Pareto principle, where it's like, if I'm probably doing it wrong, but my understanding of it is basically like you either want elite or guys that become elite and like everything else is worthless basically. But like my joke of all that is always, well, I understand that people have this principle in Dynasty, but like I've never seen a Dynasty roster that has like 8 open roster spots because they don't have elite to put in there. I think that there are useful players that are sitting through the cracks sometimes that really so often. I mean, we're coming into this weekend where we have 6 teams on bye. I think so often when you look at the way a lot of these dynasty matchups shake out, when you're starting 10 players weekly, maybe you're starting more, it's just the avoidance of outright terrible starts has a lot of value if you're trying to win in these leagues, of just having the ability to have a Romeo Doubs that can go in there during bye weeks, during injuries, because you're not getting guys off the waiver wire that you're able to plug in to have spot starts outside of the sweet prince Kendrick Bourne is now dead, and unfortunately we can't use him anymore. But I think just having some level of floor has value sometimes.
Yeah, and you look at it, I mean, obviously there's some being pulled up by that 3 touchdown game he had a while back, but I'm looking at it, Romeo Doubs has scored double digit half PPR points in over half of his games already this year. On a per game basis, he's outscoring Zay Flowers, Wandale Robinson, Nico Collins, AJ Brown, Marquise Brown, Lad McConkey, Stephon Diggs, Tedero McMillan. Like, he has very much so emerged as a guy that you can play weekly as a wide receiver three and a flex. And it just seems like people haven't really caught on to it yet. So that's why I wanted to talk about him as a
I
riser.
think I do want to make a point of that though, because flashing back to the summer, there was a big argument about how basically some of the ranking scoring favor people that do projections because they're not
Mhm.
going for like boom bust players in the way that some other players. And
Right.
my pushback on that is you don't know who the boom bust player is. You don't know that it's we in our mind, we always think it's like the rookie that is the boom bust player. And I think when you look back on some of like end of season playoff runs or some running backs that have stepped up in situations. I remember there was one random year where Gio Bernard was like a top 5 running back, and it was like he was the same Gio Bernard that he always was, but there was one random year where Gio Bernard, who would be on nobody's list for boom bust players, was like it was like top 12, top 5, something like that. Just an insane year, and we see that of I think that we so staunchly believe of like it's got to be the young players, and I'm only being punished in my rankings because I'm giving you the young high upside players and not recognizing that Romeo Doubs can score 3 touchdowns in a game like that, especially in a playoff run. He could score multiple touchdowns in a game. That like those things happen. And he's on the field. He's able to make plays. It doesn't have to be in one category of the young, unknown, excited boom bust player.
Yeah, if it's a very good point that some people probably need to hear. And I mean, I think back to like James Conner, like he was a guy that had just kind of been written off when he went to the Cardinals, and like just has consistently just like churned out top 10 numbers when everybody just like assumed that was like the end of it for him. We see this often where these guys like that for whatever reason, whether it be draft capital or early career efficiency, just get written off as not being good players. And I think that's where Romeo Doubs is. So I'm trying to capitalize on that public perception of him. But another guy we want to talk about, and this is a young, fun player, Tez Johnson. And I mean, I had my concerns about Tez Johnson because of his athletic testing, which in hindsight looks so silly. The two guys I think that I adjusted most for after the combine, moving them down in my rankings, were Cam Scadaboo and Tez Johnson. Two guys that, like, when you watch the film, you say, wow, these are really, really good players. Like Tez Johnson just tearing up that Oregon field, like doing special things almost every single game, whether it be on special teams or in offense. And then Cam Scadaboo, the same thing. And like both of these guys go to the combine, don't test well. I mean, Tez Johnson tested very, very poorly. I'm not just saying like didn't test well. He was in the second percentile for his size adjusted speed. Like this guy was slow, he was small. There was a lot of reason to be concerned. But then you watch him in the NFL, and he is doing all of the same big play, game breaking type of things that he was doing in college. And it's just like, I'm sitting here wondering why I even reacted to what he did on a random day in March
You
in
know, I,
Indianapolis.
Now I'm going to go down Debbie land a little bit because I do feel like in at least in like the college fantasy space, there's so much. If a player is at a small school and like producing but not like an elite athlete, I have levels of concern more I think on those players than a player that I see be at an Oregon and at the highest level and be a difference maker in the SEC or in the Big Ten. And maybe the testing wasn't great, but at the same time, he was playing against NFL talent every single week. And, he was there for some reason he was being productive and being able to be a difference maker. And it really comes down to the flashback to, our good friend Alfredo going into the Monday night game when Caleb Williams week 1. And Alfredo commented about how fast Caleb Williams looked in week 1. And my comment to him was, well, he knows where he wants to go now. And like that I think is a big part of it, of these players that know what they want to do on the field, know what they're supposed to do on the field. You're going to look a lot faster knowing what you're supposed to be doing on the field than if there's uncertainty or if you're in the wrong spot, whatever it might be.
Yeah, and I think there's also like just I don't know about like running mechanics and things of that nature, but I've heard a lot of people comment that like the 40-yard dash is like there's no correlation to a 40-yard dash and football speed. So much of it is just like getting out of your brakes quickly, like as quickly as you can, kind of accelerating. Like that first 10 yards in the 40-yard dash is more important than anything else. But Tez Johnson, he's just such a polished and fluid athlete. Like what he did yesterday, like hurdling over a guy, pinballing off a defender, just finding his way into the end zone. We've seen him getting behind defenses out here now. And Jeff, I can think of another guy who very recently came out of Oregon and had amazing film at Oregon and then didn't have the best testing, and everybody kind of wrote him off because of his testing. And of course, I'm talking about Bucky Irving. We all saw what he did last year as a rookie as well. So, maybe just getting on my soapbox a little bit here, but I think the combine is fun and we get to see these players doing a lot of things, but I don't think I'm putting any weight into some of this
Yeah,
athletic
I
testing
mean,
going forward.
Troy Franklin didn't test very well. He's from Oregon too. Maybe they just, maybe I don't know if it's a Nike school or what, but maybe they just don't make them know how to run fast.
Let's talk about another rookie that really kind of burst onto the scene this week, and we saw Oronde Gadsden in week 6 start to show out a little bit. He pulled 8 targets. He had a near touchdown that people got excited about. We really saw the role growing quite a bit. But I kind of chalk that up as, hey, there was no Quentin Johnson in this game. Like, I'm not going to overreact to Oronde Gadsden having one big game while QJ was out. Well, QJ was back last week, and Oronde Gadsden saw even more snaps, ran more routes, pulled more targets, 164 yards. I'm not going to go through all the records that he set, but he set a lot of records in this game. So what are we doing now? Like, are we fully buying into this and saying Oronde Gadsden broke out? This is what we should expect going forward? Because I want to believe, but at the same time, I'm also tempering expectations for a guy who's probably going to be
Yeah,
fourth in
I
the pecking
I
order.
need to give an apology to my co-host on the Football Guys DFS show, John Lee, Phil Alexander, Devin Knotts. I'm not going to do it on on their show. I'll do it on our show here, so they have to watch the show if they want to get the apology. But one of them, I believe it was John, brought up Oronde Gadsden's name last week in terms of looking at DFS plays, and I kind of bristled a little bit and said, "Well, I think it was really only because Quentin Johnson was out of the lineup. I think with Quentin Johnson back in, he'll kind of go back to the secondary role where you're looking at 3 targets and 40 yards or
Right.
whatnot." And yeah, I was wrong, definitely wrong. And I think there was so much talk this summer about just the ability, what he was doing during practice. And there was talk about all the players of Keandre Lambert Smith was in there too. Just kind of some of these deep guys just doing a lot of great things. And I think the Chargers really looked at it as, they wanted to build themselves as some level of a power run team, especially when you have Marion Hampton, when you have Najee Harris. And so having the veteran tight ends there that are the great blockers with Tyler Conklin, with Will Dissly, that naturally leans in that direction. Now that you don't have running backs and you're not playing the Miami Dolphins every single week, you need playmakers on the field. And
Makes sense.
part of attacking the having Joel is back now, but when you were without Joel, without Rashawn Slater, your 2 booking tackles, part of attacking that is, some level you want help for them to chip in, but at the same time, if we can spread the defense out wide and we have 4 basically receivers on.
Just real quick, Alt wasn't back last week. He practiced, thought he was going
Well,
to, but he
I'm
was still
hopeful,
inactive
Dave, that
last week.
Joe Alt is going to be
There was
back this
hope.
week, and we're still going to get Oronde Gadsden doing
He should
awesome
be back
things
this
this week.
should
Is
be back
where
this
my mind really is on that. So but you
Yeah.
want to spread the defense out. I get
I
it.
just wanted to get
Well,
ahead of it
they're
before
going
the
to tell
YouTube
me that I did
commenters
something.
did.
They're going to be like, how can you compare Brian Thomas, who's an alpha, to Jalen Brown? You don't even know. Don't talk about the last time I talked about basketball. I said that Derek White was a great signing, and I was a little bit nervous about Paul George. And somebody said that I was the dumbest thing they'd ever heard anybody say. And now Derek White looks pretty good compared to Paul George signing. So I just want to YouTube.
I think I think the last time we talked about basketball, we compared
Yeah.
Jameson Williams to Kevin Durant. So maybe we just
Well,
put the
Kevin
basketball
Durant's
NFL
been
comps
traded
on
like 4
on
times.
ice for a
So
little
just
bit.
saying. But anyway, neither here nor there. I think Randy Gadsden is looking pretty awesome, and I think that it unlocks some things for the Chargers. You're going to have boom bust games, but we've talked before about the reason why you have receivers in this type of situation is because of for the boom weeks, and we got probably about as close as we could to everybody having a boom week out of the 4 of them last week.
And I think the real upside play with Gadsden isn't even this year. Keenan Allen's getting up there, 33 years old. He's still playing good football right now, but we know he's probably not a part of the long-term, multi-year plan for the Chargers. So I think once Keenan Allen is out of the picture, Lad McConkey playing out of the slot, Quentin Johnson doing Quentin Johnson things, and then when we see Oronde Gadsden just kind of playing as like a basically a wide receiver, just kind of that big wide receiver with a TE next to his name on the depth chart. I think that's when we could really see the breakout happen. And this guy with NFL bloodlines, his dad was a Miami Dolphins receiver. We knew that that's what he wanted to do, but they asked him at Syracuse to switch to tight end just so he can kind of get ahead of making that change. And he's done it successfully, looking good so far, and excited to see what he can do throughout his career.
Well,
But
real
Jeff, let's
quick
talk about
though,
the
there are
not
things
fun
that I
part of the
wanted to
show. Yeah,
say that I've just remembered. One, we are going into National
yeah,
Tight Ends Day, and so Ronald Gadsden is a natural jumping off
yeah.
point, and he's the only tight end that we're talking about. But we're going into National Tight Ends Day, and so that's very, very exciting that we have this coming up this week. But really, last week could have been National Tight End. Actually, this whole season could be National Tight End season. And I know that you wrote a very interesting article last week talking about the rise of 12 personnel. And in my Monday roundup, I talked about just what we're seeing from tight end scoring right now, and it's insane what we're seeing from tight end scoring right now. And so I think that a couple years ago, like Gadsden would be like all in because it was so once you got past tight end 6, 7, 8, it's a wasteland. Right now, so I was looking at the numbers for my article, and so Kyle Pitts is on pace for 85 receptions, 800 yards. And I think there's about 45 tight ends in NFL history that's done that. Kyle Pitts right now is tight end 16 in scoring. And there are years where Kyle Pitts would
Yeah.
have been tight end 8 at his current scoring. So like that, it's just really wild on how much tight end scoring that we're really getting.
Yeah, I mean, we are seeing a huge change, and this is something that you and I we kind of like saw the tea leaves a few years ago, and we've been like talking about maybe it'll happen, and it seems like we are seeing this now, where these tight ends are just starting to emerge as primary weapons. I think the difference is though, like they already have Quentin Johnston who can do a lot of the things that, tight ends do, which is like that big physical after the catch guy. They've already got a receiver that can do those things. I think just throwing Gadsden in the mix as well just helps them even more. But let's move on and talk about some of the fallers here, Jeff. I think the obvious faller that we'll talk about first is Jayden Daniels. Obviously a faller in redraft, but I want to have more of the dynasty discussion here. This is a guy who we were talking about as the overall QB1 in the offseason, ahead of Lamar Jackson, ahead of Josh Allen. Picked up a knee sprain, missed some time with that, comes back, it's rolled up. Now he's dealing with a hamstring injury on his opposite leg. So we know so much of his rushing or so much of his fantasy production comes from his abilities as a rusher. It's not crazy to think that that's going to be impacted negatively now as he is dealing with 2 injuries on each of his legs. We don't know if he's going to miss any time, but this has just not been a great year on top of the injuries that he's dealing with. Debo has been banged up. Terry McLaurin has been banged up. The vibes around Washington just aren't great right now. So from a fantasy perspective, I mean, how far is he falling down the dynasty ranks? Like, are we at that point now where we're saying Drake May is the preferred quarterback ahead of Jayden Daniels in dynasty, or do you think that's a little bit
I
overreactive?
think that I view these guys as a bucket, and basically I'm happy to have somebody in the bucket, and I'm probably not going to get too aggressive on, especially if I have to give something up. I mean, if somebody's going to give me something
Yeah.
crazy for to make a move of like if I've got Drake May and I can get Jayden Daniels and a first and something else like that, sure, I'll have that conversation. But I think at this point, what we're seeing, if you've got these guys, these elite young quarterbacks, like it's great to have them and great to keep them. And sometimes there's just injury years. And I think that the best course of action more often than not is to just say there's injury years. Is some years they just don't put it together. And then because I think often what we see is a knee-jerk reaction to this year and him moving down from quarterback 1 to quarterback 8. And we've talked before about almost every single time that those situations come up, buying the dip on the injury player is worthwhile.
Unless you're CJ Stroud. That's the one that jumps out to me is that, we saw this with CJ Stroud and I don't think that's where we are
He's
because this
hurt.
is more injury
He's hurt.
related than it feels like it's just like exactly, and I think that's it. Like we still saw Jayden Daniels in week 1 look like Jayden Daniels of old, and then he's just been dealing with injuries ever since. So I tend to agree with you a little bit. And again, I'm pulling these from my rest of season rankings. Like if you're playing in redraft, I think I'd a-okay trying to trade away your Jayden Daniels shares. Like if somebody will buy them and you can get somebody else and maybe even stream the position, like I'm okay trying to figure that out. But I do want to have this dynasty conversation with this being the dynasty show. And I'm with you. I'm not panicking on Jayden Daniels. I think what we've seen is like the ascension of Drake May and then Lamar Jackson getting a little bit banged up. And I think Jayden Daniels getting banged up and Josh Allen cooling off a little bit from his previous production. I think that I look at all 4 of those guys just like in one tier together. And I don't know. Am I missing anybody in that tier? Is there anybody else that you
I
put
think,
up in there? Maybe
yeah, I
Caleb
mean, I'd like
Williams?
to see it a little bit more consistently with Caleb Williams. Great start to this year, but the last couple
Right.
of games have kind of knocked that fantasy scoring down. And that was always the knock on Caleb Williams. So we had this summer of basically that where's the consistency? Like avoid some of those floor games, and we'll be there. I just think in general, you're right, but I think in general, just playing like the hyper aggressive like micro move game, if you're getting pieces to stay within the tier, I think it's great. I think if you're giving up pieces to stay with it, you're getting way too cute.
Let's talk about the last faller here, Jeff. Jameson Williams. Last year, he was the per game wide receiver 19. This year, he is the per game wide receiver 55. He was averaging 6.1 targets per game last year. He's averaging 4.2 targets per game this year. It's not just that his efficiency is down, but his efficiency is down, his usage is down, his production is down. Honestly, like you got to chalk him up as a faller at this point. There's no other way to look at it, especially coming off of a 0 point performance in a primetime game. But I just don't know what's happening here, to be honest. I mean, 24 years old, coming off of a breakout year. All of the word was that he looked great in camp, that he was going to be a bigger part of the offense. And then, as I alluded to, like he is just not doing that. It's been the complete opposite. He's not playing as well. He's not as involved. He just got this $80 million contract. Still young. Like I don't really understand what's going on here. I'm wondering if you might have any insight as to why Jameson Williams isn't building off of what we saw
I
from last
mean,
season.
new offense coordinator might be part of it. New offensive coordinator learning for the first time to call plays at the NFL level, learning how to integrate all the pieces might be
Yeah.
part of it. I think that it's, I mean, the Lions are 5-2, so that's pretty good. And, it
Right.
was, they had that Sunday night game 2 weeks ago against Kansas City, and it looked like in that game, like they did exactly what we would have wanted them to do, where they targeted Amon-Ra St. Brown, they targeted Sam Laporta, they targeted Jameson Williams, and that was pretty much it. That was pretty much the only guys that got targets, and they lost. And they lost by kind of a lot. And then we saw last night against the Buccaneers where they've got Brock Wright is getting involved, Khalif Raymond is back in getting involved, and Jameson Williams. Like by the time they actually went to Jameson Williams, it was like he's already so frustrated that he drew a pass interference, basically of like, finally you guys are going to me, but like in the process of that he made a mistake, pushed off on the defender because he finally got his shot. And it's, I think it's just really hard for, like, how can you have any rhythm at all is probably a part of it. Of like, how can you
Right.
expect a playmaker to not make plays for the entirety of the game, and then when we're going to go to you is like, you got to be ready when it's your shot. Like I think that that's really difficult thing to do, and I think that that probably leans into just the inexperience of John Morton as the play caller, of as involving all these pieces and making sure that everybody's got their head in the game, is getting their touches and is able to roll with it, so when your number is called you're ready to go. That was probably the biggest part of it that we're seeing.
So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what you're saying is that you don't think that Jameson Williams has just forgotten how to play football. You don't think that there's any reason to majorly panic here. And would you say that maybe, even though he's a faller, that there's a buying window here for Jameson Williams? Because, like, he still is a 24-year-old with off the charts speed and a top 12 pick in the NFL draft. Like, all the things that we liked about Jameson Williams are still true. And we know he's also a volatile player. It feels like you could buy now, and that variance could still break in his direction over the second half of the season. Because this also, like last year, we saw Jameson Williams. He wasn't a consistent guy. Like, yeah, he finishes the per game wide receiver 19, but so much of that production came late in the year that I wonder if that's just what we could see again this year, is him kind of being that late season
Yeah,
weapon
I think
again.
that I would buy. I mean, I'm not seeing, I mean, he's still the most explosive player on the field. And we know at the wide receiver position, these things tend to work themselves out one way or the other. And it, whether it be, we've seen players traded off of good teams before. And these things, I know he did get the contract, but these things tend to work themselves out. And either behind the scenes, whatever it might be, um, would imagine. I don't know. I don't know Jameson Williams. I don't know him anything about him at all. But I tend to usually with high level wide receivers, the NFL, they like to get the ball. They like to make plays. They like to be the focal point in the center of attention. And we see situations where players are not, and they eventually end up in situations where they are, usually if they're talented enough.
And I don't know who would want to take on that $80 million contract right now, but we'll see if something changes here. But again, this is just the Bills would be nice. That would be a lot of fun. I know a guy who can rip a ball 70 yards downfield and put it on Jameson Williams. That would be a lot of fun, and I'm sure if they were trading him, they'd probably want to get him out of their conference as well. But Jeff, any final thoughts here today on the risers and fallers that we talked about? First of all, I want to thank everybody who's stuck through these last couple episodes. I've been battling a little bit of a cold. Hopefully, I'll be good to go for Friday's recording. But it's that time of the year. I don't know about anyone listening, but the seasons change, and I immediately catch a bug like clockwork every
Yeah, I
single season.
mean,
It feels like.
we joke behind the scenes, or we call it in base camp Groundhog's Day, and we're kind of, you fall into the rhythm. You're doing the same thing over and over again. I don't know about you, but like 1 o'clock on Sunday comes, I am giddy. I am so excited every single Sunday. Like that clock,
Oh yeah.
that or the clock countdown on Red Zone. I am so excited every single Sunday, and I think it's just things like that that make you realize that you're stuck in the monotony, stuck in the routine, but like like as long as that feeling is there, I think like you're doing the right thing. And it's you put in, I think both of us, we put 100% of our effort into whatever we put out. We're not always going to be right, and you want to dunk on us when we're wrong, go ahead. Like that's fine. It is what it is. I'm going to be wrong again. I'm probably wrong a lot. I'm probably wrong more this year than I am in a usual year. Just I've got a lot going on. So I mean that's just the reality of it. But again, like once that clock starts to count down and that 1 o'clock hits and everything goes off for 7 consecutive hours, uh, all in, and just love it, and just so thankful to be able to have the opportunity.
You know what I'm excited about this Sunday? So I can like go for a walk in the morning. I don't have to be on my couch watching football by 7:30 a.m. All for like extra football. That's always fun, but these early international games were turning into quite a slog on Sunday mornings, having to watch football from sunup till sundown. It'll be nice to start my football viewing at
It,
11 a.m. like a normal
it's
Sunday this week.
early in the season when I remember watching, I think it was the Chargers against it was a Raiders Chargers game that kicked off at 10, and I watched like the whole game. Last night I was like, no, I'm not doing this. No,
Yeah,
the Texans, Seattle, that's the
dude. I didn't even realize the scheduling until because it's always like the 1 hour stagger. So like the first game kicked off, and then an hour later, I'm sitting on my second TV, and I'm like, why can't I find the game? And then I look it up, and I was like, this can't be right. Like so this game kicks off at 10 p.m. Eastern. I mean, that was just
yeah,
unfair to you East
I will
Coasters.
never, I don't know. The London games are usually crap. Like I'll never complain about the like my kids have me up at like 6:45, 7 o'clock usually on Sunday morning anyway. So like a football game coming on 9:30, like that's kind of a good time of like I usually try to get them out of the house right when I get up just to like ease into the day and give my wife a little bit of a break. But that 9:30 kick is fine for me on the East Coast. I'm sorry for you on West Coasters, but I just went to bed last night, so I think the West Coasters got to enjoy some more football.
I
So
don't blame you. You say last night, a little peek behind the curtain. We do record on Tuesday night, but the show will be out Thursday. And for anybody listening on Thursday, be sure to tune in Friday morning as Jeff Bell and I do our matchup preview, going through every single game of the week, talking about all of the takeaways and everything that you need to look forward to. So, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to listen. We wouldn't be able to do this without you. So, thank you for tuning in, and we will see you on Friday.